Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Bryan Boorstein, back on. I was just looking, obviously we had our chat with you and Jordan. We talked, I feel like that was like mostly cardio that we talked about. We're going to still talk a little bit about cardio today, but then last time we had you on was actually back in June. I think it was like episode 297-ish. I just looked and we talked about like specialization phases and stuff. Check that out. It was a great episode. There's a ton of great information in there, but got Bryan back on today, man. Thanks for hopping on today. And thanks for, I know you aren't feeling the greatest today after yesterday, which I'm sure we'll hit on. But yeah, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to hop on here again.
Of course, man. Always glad to talk to you. I'm working on trying to get to double digits on the Mind Muscle Connection podcast.
You're there, man. You're almost up there. We'll get there here soon. But cool. Yeah. So yeah, just a little update on your training. Again, I know we talked about this just recently, but any insights? I know, again, you, like I said yesterday, you weren't feeling the greatest, so probably want to hit on that. But if there's anything else, any updates on that regard?
Yeah, I'll take it from 2 points, the cardio and the lifting stuff.
Yep.
So the reason I'm not feeling great is that I did my longest and hardest bike ride ever yesterday. And I think that's why we were talking off air before the show. And my theory is that I don't feel well because I went too hard for too long. But you brought up the point that it is weird that somebody would have these types of digestive issues for 24 hours with it just being from a really hard workout. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'm open to either possibility. I'm starting to feel a little bit better, and that's really what's important. But obviously the cardio has been a huge focus of my training over the last 4 to 6 months exclusively, but up to a year beyond that, as we discussed in the episode with Jordan. The last few months have really been more cardio heavy than even before that. And that's because my race is approaching. So by the time this episode comes out, I guess, I may have already done my race. It's October 7th, and you usually batch these things 3 or 4 weeks behind. So yeah, basically I'm training for this 50-mile race through some gravel and off-road terrain in the Moab, Utah, Fruita, Colorado, kind of Western Colorado area. And yesterday, I just really wanted to see if I could go close to 50 miles at what I would consider race pace, which is very different than the zone 2 stuff that I've been doing and you've been doing as part of our programming. And zone 2 is this much more sustainable, I don't want to call it effortless, but I like to describe it as the hardest pace you can go while it's still easy. And so that's how I think of zone 2. And what I did yesterday was definitely not zone 2. I spent, of the 2.5 hours, I spent an hour in zone 4 and 13 minutes in zone 5, and then a bunch of time in zone 3. So it was really hard. It was extremely taxing. It may or may not be why I feel like shit right now. But because the cardio has been ramping up in this manner, I have changed my weight training. And I think I was just in the very early stages of my full body programming when we got on the podcast with Jordan. But now I'm about over a month into it, and it has been a revelation. It's been great. Being able to train full body gives me the confidence that I'm hitting each muscle group with a frequency that's going to at least allow me to maintain muscle. The intensity is always high, so that's never an issue. And the other great thing about the full body programming is I feel a lot less pressure to hit my sessions on the day that I've programmed them to be done. So like I program it 3 days a week where it's like a Monday, Wednesday, Saturday type thing. But in reality, I just follow my recovery signals. And if I'm not feeling up for it, I push a session back. And if I, hit a session every 3 or 4 days once throughout the cycle instead of every 2 to 3 days, I don't really see that as a huge deal. And that's exactly the situation I'm in right now, where I was supposed to lift today, but after that ride yesterday and feeling sick today, I'm just going to push it one more day. And I think I'll be rewarded for that in the long run with a better workout. So full body's been great. I am currently doing it by building up to one top set of each movement. And I pretty much have every muscle group in each session. I think bis and tris are not in every session. So it might be like biceps 1 week or one session, triceps the next session, etc. But other than that, it's pretty much every muscle group gets one exercise per session. I'll take 3 or 4 sets and just gradually build up. So depending on the movement, of course, but it may go something like 8, 5, 3, 0 RIR, something like that. So that set before the 0 RIR set is a 2 or 3 RIR. So it's still what would be considered effective, I think. So it's not the big set. It's really the one I'm using to assess progress and stuff, but at least I think it's effective. And then for people that are following my program online, because I offer it on the Train Heroic app, Bryan's program, I've been writing in the description that people should consider doing 2 top sets if they're not doing the cardio like I'm doing. So if people are just following a standard, hey, I'm trying to stay healthy, I'm going to do zone 2 twice a week, you could probably get away with essentially doubling the effective volume of that program. So instead of it going 8, 5, 3, 0 RIR, you might do an extra set and it might go 8, 5, 3, 2, 0 RIR. So you get another effective set in there, not necessarily another failure set, but another effective set. And that seems to have been effective for the people following the program as well. And I've been enjoying it. So I think as a combination of something to do with cardio, I think it's a great idea. And I would advise it to a lot of people out there that are pursuing endurance as their kind of 1A focus. But yeah, I think eventually after this race ends, I'll probably go back to something a little more moderate. The plan is to cardio about 4 times a week in the winter months instead of 6 or 7 times a week like I'm doing now, and get the weight training back to 4 or 5 times a week instead of 2 to 3 times a week where it is now.
Would you do like, I'm assuming a little bit more volume overall, and probably by increasing to 4 to 5 times a week, you naturally will just increase your volume. But would you, again, maybe go back? Would you still have the 2 top sets, or would that change at all, or anything like that from a weight training perspective?
I would change the full body program completely. So when I switch off of doing cardio this much and I go back to like normal person 3 or 4 times a week, let's be healthy cardio, I'll go back to a more like split style training program, what you're running or what I was running prior to the full body iteration, where I'm hitting each muscle group mostly every 4 to 5 days. I love these cycles that are off calendar week. So I always purposefully try to design these cycles that take 8 or 9 days or 10 days to get through. And I actually find that frequency to be about right for me on most muscle groups too, where if I hit it with 4 to 7 hard sets in a session, I'm usually not ready to go again 3 days later. And so I really like having that 4 or 5 day buffer, which is another reason I love the kind of off calendar week programs, just allowing you to follow your signals a little bit more effectively.
Yeah, definitely. It's weird to get around, or like it's weird initially because you're so used to like the 7-day calendar, and as coaching me, like I really like the routine. And so like I like knowing, but it is super helpful for when you have stuff come up, and stuff inevitably comes up all the time. So it's nice to have that extra flexibility there. So as far as like your results have been, I know it's been, I think you said a little over a month. How are you feeling from like a muscle maintenance standpoint? Obviously, you probably aren't like expecting to add any tissue right now. It's probably just, hey, I'm just trying to maintain through this and dedicate more time towards the cardio. Have you felt like you've done a pretty good job of that? I know you mentioned your body weight's come down, so I'm curious to hear about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. That was actually exactly where I was going to go with that answer as well, because a number of weeks ago, I noticed my first, call it drop in performance. I have this hack leg press hybrid machine that I use, and I've been using it for 3 years. Every cycle, it's always there. So there's no more like central nervous system neural gains to make. Like whatever I can do on it is what I can do on it. And I lost a rep a couple weeks ago for the first time in years. I lost a rep. And I was like, I wonder if that's like the cardio or what that is. Came back the next week and then I made the rep. So it was all good. Didn't really think much of it. And then in the last week or two, I've lost another rep on that one. I lost a rep on another exercise. And I gained reps on some too. Like my leg curl, I've been setting all-time lifetime PRs on leg curls, which is actually an interesting tangent because you hear people talk a lot about how isolation movements are a much better assessment in a diet of whether you're losing muscle or not. And so my isolation movements have been great. I haven't really been losing any strength on those. Where I've mostly seen it has been the hack press movement and then upper body pressing. So like my anterior delt press and my chest presses are struggling. And those have always notoriously in the past, even when I'm not doing cardio, they've been the first thing to go when I start dieting and losing weight. And with this small drop in performance, rep here, rep there, the scale has been trending down really fast the last couple weeks. For a while, with all this cardio, I was able to maintain my body weight in the low 190s. And like it might dip a little bit and then it would be up again and it would dip and be up. And for the most part, though, over many months, it was pretty consistent in the low 190s and I was progressing fine in the gym. In the last few weeks, it's had a number of mornings where I've woken up and I've seen, in the last 2 weeks, I've seen a 187 twice. I've seen 185 twice. And just today, I saw 184. And honestly, that's because I was sick and I had that whole experience. But my body weight is 100% trending down. And so now when I assess this small drop in performance that I'm seeing where I was attributing it to the cardio or concurrent training issues, right? Now I'm attributing it more to just being at a lighter body weight, because these are the exact same small drops that I saw in 2022 when I did my last diet and I got down to a low of 182. Now I'm basically sitting at 185, 186, 187, somewhere in there. That's about the time where I started to see some performance drops in the past as well. And so it's been really interesting to me because we've obviously squashed that whole concurrent training thing in that cardio is going to kill your gains and all of that stuff. I think at this point, we're mostly beyond that. As long as it's programmed intelligently and it's not overdone, it shouldn't have a huge mitigating impact. But with the amount of cardio that I'm doing, I actually am surprised that I've been able to maintain performance as well as I have. And I do think a big piece of that is this switch to the full body training and just giving my body less to have to recover from, and also less psychological anxiety. Because going into a leg day, when I bike the day before and I bike the day after, and I may even be biking on the day of the leg day, those workouts were brutal. I really would dread them. And I would dread being sore for 4 days afterwards as well. And with the full body program, I don't have any soreness. That's been really cool. And overall, I think everything's going about as well as it could be going, considering I'm 3 weeks out from the race and putting some really high volumes in.
So for you then, with your body weight trending down, clearly you're in a deficit right now. Or is that something that you're going to try to kind of counterbalance by eating a little bit more, or you're fine with?
Yeah, I'm more looking at it like that as a byproduct. I also look at it as long as I can keep my power high, like the amount of watts that I can put out, I am benefited by weighing less when it comes to this race. And I'm continuing to put out incredible performances regarding speed and duration in my bike training. And so at this point, I'm just going to let it ride. One thing I just threw out there as on my podcast, I was talking to Straker about it last week. The rep episode should be dropping here September 19th or something like that. But we were talking about how I have this small thought in the back of my brain that maybe I just keep at this until I get to the low 180s and do a photo shoot and see what
difference
182 looks like when you get there from cardio and what 182 looks like when you get there from dieting. Because the other cool thing about this experience, if I were to do that, I don't know how it's going to play out and what it would look like. But if we just assume hypothetically that I get there and the body composition is similar, man, I have had zero hunger. As you pointed out, I am clearly in a deficit because I am losing weight very consistently. I'm down 8 pounds from a number of months ago. So I'm clearly in a deficit. And yet I haven't been hungry one time. I am force feeding myself because I need so much food, and I literally go to bed every night stuffed. And it's been really interesting to experience losing weight that way versus losing weight in the counting macros, doing steps, and being extremely detailed about everything. It's just it's blown my mind, to be honest.
It makes sense, right? You're just expending so much energy, like in terms of how much you're doing on a weekly basis. So it makes sense, and you have a good amount of muscle mass. It makes sense there on that you're also not trying to like undereat either, though. I feel like that's probably where a lot of people get themselves into trouble there on that aspect of it, is they try to undereat. And then that's where you start to freaking just probably run into some issues with hunger and things like that. Have you had to, you mentioned you were like you said force feeding. I'm sure you're not necessarily force feeding, but you're probably just eating a little bit more than what you're used to. Are you like having to have like more liquid calories, or is it like been like relatively quote unquote clean, or has it been like you're able to just do whatever you want with it because you're just expending so much energy?
Yeah, mostly the latter, a little bit of all of them that you brought up. The main thing I'm doing is making sure that I'm getting enough protein. So I'm making sure I'm getting between 120 grams a day. I know that's a wide range, but I usually fall more in that like 180 to 190. And then some days it's a little less, some days it's a little more. But aside from getting enough protein and making sure that I'm eating some veggies and a bunch of fruit, when I say force feeding, what I really mean by that is I'm eating not clean because I can't eat enough clean calories. And so I'm eating brownies and cookies and pizza and cheesesteaks and French fries. It's like I'm doing a dirty bulk, and yet I'm in a deficit. Yeah, it's just been wild, man.
Like the athletes, right? People will see what they eat and they're like, oh, they can eat that. But you just expend so much energy with like practice and all that stuff that you just have to get those calories in any way you can. And honestly, eating it that way is a little bit easier than, like you said, trying to eat just quote unquote clean all the time. From a training standpoint over the next couple of weeks with the race coming up, what's like, the weight training, are you going to like deload like the week of the race? And then same thing with the racing. I'm just curious from my standpoint of what does that look like? Is it the same thing like you would taper for like a powerlifting meet where the week before you're just going like lower volume? I'm just curious to hear what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I would love that question. I do have a planned taper week for cardio leading into it, but it looks a little bit different when you're doing a race that is considered endurance versus a race that might be more glycolytic or whatever. Usually the typical way that you deload is by deloading volume, because that's the most fatiguing thing when you think about powerlifting or weight training, right? But in the situation where my race is an endurance race and not a glycolytic intense race, so to speak, you actually want to deload intensity, but you don't really want to deload volume too much.
Sure.
Because you want to make sure that your legs are still, they got the juice in them to go. And one of the things that bike riders or cyclists tend to find ubiquitously across, it seems, everybody, is that you don't really want to take much more than one day away from pedaling, because your legs start to feel heavy and start to accumulate a bunch of lactate quicker than you want them to. And so continuing to cycle is important. So my plan that final week with the cycling is to hit about 4 rides. None of them will have any zone 4 or zone 5 in there. It'll be mostly zone 2, a little bit of zone 1, and a couple small intervals of zone 3. And when you think of zone 3 interval, it's not like you're really working that hard. It's just a little harder than zone 2. So you get your body, just keep it familiar with the stimulus. So I'll do about 4 rides that week, which is also a decrease in volume. So there is a bit of that as well, but it's mostly a decrease in intensity where there's no interval work or anything like that. And then as far as the weights go, I'm just going to continue training the full body program up until probably Wednesday, and the race is Saturday. So I'll likely just hit my last full body workout, probably day one on Wednesday, and then take Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off of weights. Probably come back Monday and be ready to go again with my new cycle. So chances are I will move away from that full body program after that. So looking at October 10th, 11th, something like that, we'll probably start the new, actually October 9th, we'll start the new cycle in Bryan's program. That'll be some sort of new version of split routine, something like that.
Awesome. Yeah. So a couple weeks away. And again, it sounds like not too much of a change in terms of like how you're going to like taper and stuff like that. Just like you said, intensity is going to be the big thing, which is interesting to think about how it is a little bit different in terms of what you want to taper from like if you're doing powerlifting or endurance type of event as well. So cool. And then afterward, you said you're going back to training a little bit more. Cardio is going to come down. Still probably a little TBD on exactly what that's going to look like. I guess over the next couple of weeks, you'll formulate something there.
But yeah. So I don't know if I mentioned this to you yet, but I'm going to be coached just for my cardio by Mike T. Nelson.
Yeah, you were saying maybe. You were saying maybe on that.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool.
So I think we're going to do that. I guess we haven't like officially said. We've had a couple email exchanges being like, yeah, we should do this. So as far as I know, it's happening. And yeah, so the plan is basically going to be to let him take the reins on my cardio. Okay. And I'm going to continue programming my weights and he'll just program around that. But yeah, I think my best guess is it'll be 4 times a week that he'll program for me. My hope would be that we get 2 sessions on the rower and 2 sessions on the bike, or maybe 3 on the rower and 1 on the bike. I really despise the stationary bike. I know you do it for your zone 2 work.
Dude, there's some times where I'm like, holy shit, I'm sitting there just like, all right, I'm 1/3 of the way done. All right, it can be tough, but yeah.
Yeah. I despise it. And especially, I don't think I despised it as much before I knew how great it was to ride outside. And so now that I know what it's like to ride outside, it's, oh man, like I get 10 minutes into being on the stationary bike and I feel like I should be done. That's like how monotonous and boring it is for me. So mad props to you that you've been smashing all your zone 2 sessions on there. But if I'm going to continue to do zone 2 stuff on the bike, I'm going to need to figure out something to watch or distract me or something like that, because podcasts aren't doing it.
I usually, I pair it with watching something, whether that's like a continuing education or a podcast. It's, you definitely got to find something to do. Otherwise, man, it's monotonous. I try to use it as like a way to just mentally push through kind of boredom, because I think that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to work on. And so I'm just trying to use it from that standpoint. But yeah, so cool, man. So you're going to work with him specifically on cardio and trying to improve that. Is there anything that you're trying to improve specifically there? I don't know how I would ask that. I don't know if there's like anything specific.
I know what you're asking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the main reason that this whole relationship with Dr. Mike T began, or the reason that he offered to work with me in this capacity, was because of the disparity between what my performance is on my VO2 max assessment on the rower, which I think we discussed with Jordan, maybe,
Yeah.
where I performed quite well on the VO2 max test using the 2K test on the rower compared to the VO2 max test that I did in the lab when I had the mask on and the hoses and all that stuff. And so that test in the lab came back super low, like below average, actually average, but on the lower end of average. And then my row VO2 max test, which is not supposed to be as accurate as the one with the mask and the hoses on, put me like 13.5 points higher VO2 max than the actual lab test did. And he essentially wants to try and get my VO2 max up. He's looking at his little like pet project to take this big muscular guy and make him into a more efficient cardiovascular machine. And so, yeah, my hope is that A, it work, B, that I enjoy the process and learn something, and C, that maybe the improved cardiovascular efficiency will transfer over to my biking when spring rolls around and I get back onto the gravel doing that some more.
Cool. Yeah, no, that'll be cool to see and see if you can improve that and everything. So I guess to switch gears then, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about HRV. I had Dr. Mike Nelson on, and I took his course on HRV, which I would highly recommend if you're interested, and that I think it's super useful. I'm going to have him on again, but I know you started tracking it. And so I just was curious to hear your experiences with it. I know we've talked about it like back and forth a little bit, but yeah, I guess start with just why you implemented it and your experiences with it, and then we can go from there with it.
Yeah, that's awesome that you took his course, because I would say at this point you are very much more knowledgeable than me about HRV, given that you took a course on it. I have only my 9 years of experience using it. So that's what I will be speaking from. But back in 2015, 2016, I bought a Polar H7 chest strap. I think they're out to like H10 or H11. Now, it's definitely an older model. But back in the day, before we had Apple Watches and Garmin's and things like that, the way that you would check your HRV was you would connect this Bluetooth chest strap to your phone and download an app called Elite HRV. That app still exists, but I don't know exactly if it's still popular or not. But basically, every morning, the protocol was you would wake up, you would put your chest strap on, you'd put your phone next to you, and you would follow this guided breathing thing for 2.5 minutes. And at the end of your 2.5 minutes, it would give you a score from 1 to 100. And that's the first thing that I think is really interesting, is that they took whatever your actual HRV was, which is whatever your heartbeats is, and they would convert it to a 1 to 100 scale. So you get like a number that makes sense based on grades we've received in the 1 to 100 scale. So when I first started doing that, I was in the mid to high 60s. And over the course of doing it for 2 or 3 years, I managed to work my way up to being in the low 80s most of the time, high 70s, low 80s, which was considered a top 10 percentile for people that used the Elite HRV app worldwide. I remember one specific scenario that was really interesting, where I was in Costa Rica for a wedding, and I woke up one morning and felt fine, took my HRV, and it said it was like 52 or 48 or something like that. And the day before it had been 82. So I was like, what in the hell is going on? I was like, all right, I don't know, weird things. I took my rings, I went out to the beach, I hung them over a palm tree, and I did my workout, which was like CrossFit at the time. It was like muscle ups and dips and pull ups and pistol squats and whatever. Literally moments after getting back from that workout, my body fell in shambles. Like, I was probably one of the most sick I've ever been in my life. I remember telling my wife that I literally thought I might die. And as it turned out, I think it was some of the lettuce I had eaten the night before. It had water on it, and the water wasn't filtered. And so I got some sort of bug in my system. But for the next 48 hours, I was in the bathroom constantly and had a fever that was like 102, 103, like really bad. And the HRV predicted that, which was insane to me at the time. I felt fine, but HRV was like, nope, you're about to get sick. And I did, in fact, get really sick. So that was my first experience with HRV. And then I took a number of years off of it after that. And I didn't really start integrating it back in again until I got my Apple Watch 2.5 years ago. And since then, I've been using it again. And so Apple Watch does it a bit differently than the way that it was done in my past, because Apple Watch does not convert to the 1 to 100 scale. So it gives you your actual reading of milliseconds between heart, which I think is interesting. I just don't know how to comprehend it as well as I did on the 1 to 100 plan. I don't know what's good and what's bad. It's like you just compare to yourself and hope that it's improving or whatever, or you look for your baseline. But that's the way I've been going about it with the Apple one. So The Apple Watch will ping you randomly throughout the night and throughout the day, and it will give you these random HRV readings when you're like very unprepared for them, which is extremely different than the way Elite HRV would do it, where you would sit there in the morning, you would breathe a certain way, and it would give you a reading based on this calm, meditative state that you created. And so when I started using the HRV again with the Apple Watch, I wanted to have this morning consistent reading that I could use as my kind of baseline each morning instead of relying on these random readings. Because if you have a random reading of HRV, think about if it pings you like in between sets of squats.
It's going to be way lower.
It's going to be way lower because there's just your heart rate is faster and thus there's less variability between each heartbeat. It's like, boop, 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 boop. So I didn't like that there was so much variability in my heart rate variability. So these morning ones have been great. And I've had you doing the same thing where you sit down, you do the Breathe app, which is on the Apple Watch, and it guides you through a 1 minute long breathing thing. And then it spits you out an HRV number after that. And so I've gotten a lot of the same value from doing it with the Apple Watch as I did with the Elite HRV. Like you and I have discussed, we actually have very oddly high HRV readings compared to most people that have an Apple Watch and get the similar readings. So you and I tend to have our good readings be in the mid 200s. Like a good reading for me is a really good one. It's like 280. And I would say 230 to 250 is like a pretty average reading. And then I usually find that anything below 200 means that I'm compromised in some way. And I would say the morning reading that I've had since getting the Apple Watch is probably 150. So my range would be, hey, 150 is really bad. You're not recovered at all. And it would be like, you crushed it. You slept well. Everything's on point. Good to go. And so, yeah, it's weird having it not be on the 1 to 100 scale, but you still can assess these numbers that provide a baseline for you. And so, yeah, I think I'll leave that to you and see what other questions you have.
Yeah, the baseline I think is important, right? Because like you said, a lot of people are like, what do I do with this? And from my understanding, you want to at least get at least 2 to 4 weeks of a good baseline of it, right? To see, because like you said, it is really going to be dependent on the person. But yeah, so one thing I've noticed, and I don't know if so I do it, I haven't used the Breathe app. I actually need to figure out how to do that because what I do in the morning is I do a meditation, but it's through Headspace. So I don't know if that would be similar or if that could alter it a little bit.
How do you know that the watch is going to ping your HRV during that time?
It pings it every morning, like early in the morning, no matter what, it's pinging it in the AM. And this was actually what I wanted to bring up to you because I thought this was interesting. And again, this is where I think taking this data, because I've been doing it now I'm looking right now at it, August 14th. So it's been about a month now that I started actually implementing it. And it's always lower on the weekends. I guess I've had a few, shouldn't say every time, but it tends to be lower on the weekends. And during the week, I'm waking up between 5 and 6. On the weekends, that's usually closer to 6 to 7. And I'm starting to wonder if when it's between 5 and 6, I'm in like the 200s most of the time. Like there's been a few days where it's been a little bit lower, and I'm sure that's because of my recovery. But it seems like the earlier I get it, it tends to be like in the 200s. Whereas if I don't, it's like I've had as low as like my first reading in the morning be like 97, 93. Now, was I just under recovered or was the timing, was it same thing with like scale weight, was like just it not standardized or what? But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or anything like that.
Is your heart rate higher on the weekends when you wake up an hour or two later? Because heart rate does climb throughout the day. So is it still the same kind of beats per minute at 7 a.m. as it is at 5 a.m.?
It's not a huge difference that I've noticed, at least. It seems pretty with that, at least the data that I have with it. That seems like that takes it like less. Again, I don't know what this would look like, but it seems like there's only one number that I get on the resting heart rate. So I don't know if I can zoom in and look at more data, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the thing with the Breathe app, when you use that on the watch, is that it detects your heart rate while you're doing it as well. So I wouldn't call that your resting heart rate. That would just be your heart rate during your exercise. Yeah. So you might have a little bit more data to throw into that pot if you were to get your actual heart rate, not your resting heart rate that your app gives you, which could ping at any point, right? But the what your heart rate is actually during the time that you're doing the HRV test. Yeah. But that would be my only thought, because I know sometimes, so I do my podcasts on Tuesday mornings and I never wake up on time because my podcast is at 6 a.m. I never wake up on time where I have like enough time to just relax and do my HRV before the podcast. I'm always rushing to get there by 6 a.m. And so on those days, I always do my HRV after my podcast, which is about an hour later. And on those days, it is always lower. And the only correlation that I've found has been that because I've been up for an hour already, or because it's an hour later in the day, that my heart rate trends a little bit higher. And that would just mean that there's less variability between each heartbeat. Beyond that, man, I don't really know, unless maybe you just function better getting up at 5:30 than you do at 6:30.
Yeah.
I guess that's a possibility as well. Do you like tend to feel lethargic or whatever on weekends? Maybe it's just because the week's over and you finally can unwind and relax, or
Yeah, I probably stay up a little bit later on the weekends, right? Friday, Saturday night, I'm probably staying up a little bit later, just watching TV and stuff like that. So that could be part of it, like what I do before bed as well too. Yeah, again, it was more so just interesting data that I wanted to just share with you and see if you had any thoughts on that. I wasn't.
yeah. Do you get the random pings throughout the night too? Like you wake up in the morning and see some?
Not at night because I don't wear my watch to sleep. So I won't get it. I won't get it then. But it is throughout the day, like you said, though. You'll get those pings throughout the day. So
it always pings me at either 3:14 a.m. or 4:14 a.m.
That's crazy.
And I always wake up and see my HRV number at that exact time. And so I do find those readings interesting too, because you'd think that provides a relatively consistent state for you to be in at that time of the morning. Yeah. You should be in a similar sleep stage, and your body temperature and your breathing rate should all be relatively similar. And so I like looking at those readings as well.
So I think still probably need to get a couple weeks here to figure it out. But that was one thing that I'm like starting to formulate in my head there based on that. But again, it could be many different things than that. So cool. So I guess, what do you feel like, has it been useful and how are you implementing it? Or are you even using it for anything? Has it been helpful for anything? And then, what would you, if you are using it for something, what would maybe be some decision making that you have behind it?
Yeah, it is mostly just awareness. I still tend to value RPE, or subjective state of readiness. I guess RPE is the wrong word, but subjective state of readiness for the day. And I always make a subjective assessment of how I feel in the morning before I even look at how my sleep was. Because if you wear your watch to sleep, you also get like your sleep quality or whatever. But before I look at my sleep app, or I look at my heart rate or my HRV or anything like that, I wake up and make a self-assessment of how I feel. And I will very rarely, if ever, change my workout plans because I got a high or low HRV reading in the morning. Like I said, I mostly look at it as like an awareness piece, just information to create a trend. I really love it for its ability to assess the disease coming up, what happened in Costa Rica, because the same shit happened yesterday when I finished my bike ride and I felt like crap and I had to run to the bathroom. The first time I was sitting on the toilet, like 5 minutes after the bike ride, it pinged my HRV and it was a 6.
Oh, man.
I've never in my entire life seen a 6 before. And I'm sitting there being like, what in the world? And then an hour later, it pinged me again and it was 18. And I hadn't seen an 18 ever before either. And so it is in some ways like really cool in its ability to detect when things are wrong. And so I think if I were to see a number that was so low, like even outside of my normal range, say I woke up one morning and I say my normal low, like the lowest low I'll get will be 150. If I woke up and got like a 48 or something like that, yes, I would probably be like, oh shit, I'm about to get sick. Like there's something wrong. But as long as it's within the range of what I consider normal, 150 to 280 on a day-to-day basis, I don't really let that influence my training decisions too much.
So do you think it could be helpful from like a muscle building standpoint at all, or just based on what you just said there? Or do you think that it maybe is a little bit more effective from like a cardio endurance aspect?
It's probably equally effective for both. I would just watch the trend. And another thing I would say is if I saw multiple days in a row where it was on the lower end of my spectrum, so say it was 152, 162, and 148 or whatever. So those are all still somewhat high numbers for most people, but for me, they're on the lower end of my spectrum. If I saw multiple days of that in a row, my guess is that it would correlate with some poor sleep, some signs of under recovery, that I'm feeling some. And yeah, with the combination of the HRV and the way that I'm feeling, I would probably come to a decision that, hey, maybe it's time for a deload or whatever. It's probably worth paying more attention to when you're actually feeling run down yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just think the way that you feel trumps whatever your data is telling you.
Yep. No, I agree 100%. Same thing with like sleep, right? If you feel like you're sleeping good, you're feeling well rested, that's probably a good sign there. Even if maybe your sleep, that says your sleep quality is poor. Same thing with HRV. Don't let it alter your decision making. Just if anything, you can use it as data and maybe look back on, okay, hey, what was off the last couple of days? Or like you said, did you not sleep well? Did you maybe have some alcohol? Because I'm sure that's something too that I think you had an experience with that where you did drink like one night or something. The next day, like HRV was a little bit lower. I'm assuming that's probably something as well too there.
Yeah, but of course you would feel that. Like
You would
would
know.
wake up and be like, oh shit, I
You would
had
know.
6 beers last night. Like maybe I shouldn't train today, or I don't know. I wouldn't rely solely on the HRV.
Out of curiosity, what is it? What was it this morning after yesterday?
This morning it was 219. Actually, it's okay. All throughout the day yesterday, it was super low. So after I got that 6, I got an 18, and then I got a 25, and then a 42, and then a 32. So it was like very low all day yesterday. And then throughout the night last night, it clocked me at my normal 3 a.m. time at 136, which is pretty standard for a nighttime reading for me, somewhere in the low to mid 100s. And so I had a feeling this morning doing the HRV that it was going to be okay. And actually, as we're sitting here talking, I haven't had a single stomach, and they've been prevalent every 15 to 20 minutes for the last 24 hours. And now we've been talking for 45 minutes and I haven't had a single issue. It's likely that this thing is on the way out, and maybe the HRV picked up on that as well.
Yeah, obviously, got to stay hydrated. I like how in your Instagram, you're like, and before anyone asks, I was hydrated. Speaking of, real quick, before we move on, because I do want to talk about some muscle building stuff. You mentioned element. Do you call it element or elementy? What do you call it?
Both. I actually
Both.
used to call it LMNT, and now I just say element because it's way easier.
I was saying LMNT, and my fiance was just giving me so much shit. She said, it's element. So I'm like, all right, whatever. What are your thoughts on it? Do you like it as like an electrolyte? I know you also mentioned Gatorade. Yeah, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I love Element. I've been using it for a number of years now. I think it tastes great. My wife doesn't exactly agree. She thinks she forces it down, but I actually think I love all the citrusy flavors, the citrus, the straw, the raspberry, the orange, and the watermelon. I like all of those. And so I buy the variety pack and I have it on recurring subscription every 2 months. But yeah, I use them pretty consistently. On days I lift, I put 1 in with my like protein Gatorade mix. And on days that I'm biking, I put either 2 or 3 in with my Gatorade protein mix. And I'm a huge fan of electrolytes. I think that it's important for pretty much everybody. And there's certainly populations that probably should limit their sodium. So I'm not going to say everybody per se, but for most athletes, I think it's important that you have sufficient sodium. And that could be even if you're not sweating a ton. I know that in the winter I lift and I don't sweat at all. In fact, I'm freezing and I'm in a hoodie the whole time, but I still will take a pack because you just want to make sure, 2,500 milligrams a day, something along those lines, salt your food, whatever. And then potassium and magnesium are also 2 that are usually a little bit delinquent in most Western society. And so I think just making sure that you have those 3 just at decent, moderate levels is going to be important for your well-being and body functioning and things like that.
100%. I agree. I think we just, like I said, we started taking Element. We got on the subscription probably about a month ago. And man, I'll tell you what, after, I would play hockey. I do have Gatorade during hockey. I sweat a ton during hockey. And man, afterwards, I just wouldn't feel great. I have a headache for a while. And ever since I started doing Element and I would do it afterwards, getting that sodium in, man, dude, I don't feel that way anymore. Could, again, been doing a little bit more cardio. That could be helping a little bit, but I definitely, anytime I sweat a ton, having some Element, dude, just getting that sodium has been super important. Plus, I think, like you mentioned, some people probably need to look out for their sodium intake, but most people are going to be listening to this who are like health focused and from a nutrition standpoint, probably don't get in as much sodium as somebody that eats more processed food that's loaded with sodium in it. So again, something to look out there. But yeah, 100%. I think it's great. And something that I'm going to keep getting to because I think it's super beneficial. And same thing with my fiance with her runs. She does it afterwards and it's been super helpful for her too. Cool, man. Let's dive into some muscle building talk. There's some new stuff coming out here. Not new stuff, but I feel like these are now starting to gain a little bit more traction. 1 1/4 reps. They're also called integrated partials as well too. If you can maybe just hit on the kind of rationale behind it, and then we can talk about it in a little bit more detail and maybe how like you're using it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is just about biasing more of the time that you spend into the length and position. And so whether you're doing like a short overload movement, like say a cable row, and you're going to be limited by the short position anyways. So by doing a little pulse kind of quarter rep at the length and position, you get to spend more time in the lengthened position compared to how much time you're spending in the short position. The one thing I'm not like the biggest fan of on the short overload movements with the integrated partials is that you are still very limited by the short position. And so by you fatiguing the lengthened position even more than you normally would, it does actually cause fatigue that then makes it even harder to get to the short position. Yeah. And so, because you generate a little bit of momentum and power from that lengthened position, but when you fatigue that out, it's hard to get that in the latter reps. And so with the short overload movements, when I'm using the integrated partials, I feel like it's a necessity to then continue to let range of motion drop off even further. So say one rep is a lengthened partial plus a full rep. When you get to the point that you can obviously still do the lengthened partials, but you can no longer complete a full range of motion rep to the short position, I would consider taking an extra 4 to 6 additional attempts where you're just letting that range of motion fall off versus just stopping the set when you can no longer get short, because then you are essentially still failing the movement at the short position and not at the lengthened position. One consideration there. When it applies to lengthened movements, like if you're talking about a hack squat or something like that, you're very much not limited by the short position. You are absolutely limited by the lengthened position. And those quarter reps are maniacally awful. It's like by the end of the set, you have to give every possible ounce of effort you have just to do the quarter rep. And then you're like, and now I'm supposed to do a fucking full rep. It's like, it makes me wonder what I'm doing sometimes because it's that hard. But also you realize that when something is that hard, that it's probably good for you. And so I think it does have, a little bit more universal applicability probably on lengthened movements.
Real quick too, because we missed on this. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of people understand what they are, but could you maybe explain like what it is and maybe what it looks like real quick?
Yeah. So let's just say you're doing a hack squat or a back squat or whatever. You go down to the very bottom, you come up a quarter of the way, or you just pulse. So on a squat, that usually looks like coming up just to parallel, maybe like an inch above parallel. So you're just barely getting to that sticking point, and then you're reversing direction and going back down again. And then you do a full rep. And so that counts as one rep. On a short movement, it's the same idea. You're doing a row. You go to the bottom where your arms are stretched out. You do a quarter rep, come back to the stretched position, and then pull all the way up.
And you're finding that, you've implemented it for me with the RDLs and hack squat. I think that's
the fly.
it.
You have a fly as well.
Oh, the fly. Yep, you're right. What was I going to ask with this? Oh, so you found with the short position that it can be tough to get that, like towards the end there, it's tough to get that length. And so you're saying let the range of motion drop off, and you're going to spend a little bit more time in that lengthened position because it's still challenging to get all the way to the shortened position.
Yeah, it's just a tool that you can use in your toolbox, right? For you, what I'm doing with the short overload movements right now is we're doing one full range of motion set, and then we're doing one set where it's a predetermined range of motion stop at 60 or 70%. So you're able to go heavier that way and really overload that lengthened range a lot more. Whereas when you do these 1 1/4 reps on a short movement, you're actually having to use less weight than you would if you were using full range of motion reps. So when I do my cable rows, I was doing 180 pounds for sets of 8 to 10. And then when I started implementing the 1 1/4 reps, I had to drop it to 160 pounds and I could only do 6. So yeah, I think that ultimately you are going to be spending more productive time in the lengthened range if we do it like the way I'm programming for you. And so this cable row that I'm doing right now is literally the only short movement that I'm doing it on. And I'm only doing it as an experiment so I can decide if it's something worth programming into your program and group programs and things like that. Where I stand right now after doing it for 4 weeks at this point is that I think I'm mostly going to stick to the 1 1/4 reps for movements that are lengthened and continue to do like lengthened sets like we're doing with you, or with full range of motion reps into partials as my 2 priority ways of focusing on short overload movements.
So again, something like back type, you're leaning towards, hey, just what we've been doing there with that, where we're not doing the integrated partials. But what about delt work? Again, it's going to depend on if you're doing like a cable one, or if you're doing like a dumbbell or around that.
Yeah, exactly. Good question, because I think that the dumbbell lateral raise is going to have the same exact issue as the cable row, if not even worse. Because when your arm is hanging straight down with gravity, essentially, it takes no effort for you to move it out 5, 6, 7, 8 inches. you should be able to do that without even thinking about it because there's no resistance there at all. So I don't really see the point. And when you're doing it with a cable behind the back where the cable is set at wrist height and there's plenty of resistance at the bottom of that rep, then yeah, it takes a monumental effort for you to get the thing moving for 6 or 7 inches. But yeah, it just doesn't seem to have the same practical application for the dumbbell version of that movement.
So you hit on exercise selection on that. Again, it's you're going to look for more length and movements probably to implement this with moving forward. Is there any other thoughts around like exercise selection with this, or is that kind of yeah?
Yeah, those are the only ones I've really experimented with it on. So I've done it on the same as you, the fly, the hack squat, the RDL, and then obviously my cable row. I've done it once on the cable lateral raise, and I will be implementing that into my new program after the bike race ends. We'll definitely have some 1 1/4 cable lateral raise in there. But to be honest, man, for most movements, regardless of whether it's lengthened or not, I think I get more benefit. And I'm curious your thoughts too, but I feel like I get more benefit from doing those like 60% range of motion stop reps where you just avoid the part of the movement that's easy and you just stay in the really hard zone. I just seem to get more out of those. And yeah, I don't know. The 1 1/4 thing has been cool, fun to mess around with, and really awful on the hack squat, like I discussed. But I'm not sure that it's something that's going to have staying power in programming for me.
My kind of thought on it is like I think you have to decrease the weight on some of these things so much that could be a potential thing to look out for, right? Because then it's like, all right, yeah, it's like way harder. You know what I mean? Which I think that has its pros and cons, right? I would imagine your thoughts on that in terms of if you have to decrease weight on something, it's probably a good thing and a bad, like it's probably, it's not good or bad, because I think from a hypertrophy standpoint, I think anytime we can find ways to reduce weight a little bit, that's probably, and still get a good stimulus, it's probably a good thing. But I would imagine that if you go too far in that direction, that could lead to some issues there. So kind of something to think about, because I'm also thinking about an RDL from an injury standpoint, probably something to look out for too. Like you have to decrease the weight on that as well too, if you're doing 1 1/4.
Yeah, although you did tweak your back doing a 1 1/4, right?
Yep.
Was it during the quarter rep at the bottom?
I think when I was coming up, it was just, super weird. But yeah, I think it was when I was coming up on that. I don't think it was at the bottom. I think it was when I was coming up.
Okay. Yeah, you just have to be super diligent on something like an RDL there, because it's already so hard at that length and position, and you're in your weakest mechanical standpoint where your low back is in a sense compromised, or it's at least acting isometrically to support you. And yeah, to come up, stop, go back down again, stop, and come up again requires a lot of stopping and starting for your joint structure. And yeah, I think dropping the weight is important, but there's a lot of variability in there. And I do think that, like you said, there are positives and negatives to it.
I generally like it though. And I've been putting it in some clients programming off this too. What about like so I know you said dumbbell fly press, we've been doing it. What about any other chest work? Would you throw it in there for any like maybe cable or machine type work or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I probably would. I haven't yet, but I do think that I would. The machine or cable would be a great choice. I definitely wouldn't do it with a barbell bench press. Not that we program much barbell bench press at this point anyways. But yeah, there's definitely applicability there. I don't know, man. I'm not sure where I stand on it at the moment. Like I said, if you were to put me on the spot, I still think doing like a 60 to 70% range of motion rep and staying in that hard range is probably better. And maybe there's even something to even using less range and just doing quarter reps. Studies haven't gone there and investigated this yet. They always seem to use a 50-ish stop point when the studies do these lengthen sets. But I wonder like if there's benefit down there, because my theory has always been that you want to exhaust the full range from 50% range of motion or 100% range of motion all the way down to 10% range of motion. And so if a quarter rep is effective, then why wouldn't it just be effective to do a set of 10 quarter reps? Like, why would we even need to come out of that range if we can stretch the muscle? And especially on something like a chest press, that's where you feel everything happening.
Yep.
You get to the short position of a chest press, and it really seems like the triceps and the front delts are doing more of the work than anything. And so, yeah, maybe now I just talked myself into experimenting with quarter reps just straight up. Maybe that'll be something in your program coming up in a little bit.
It's funny with some of this length and partial stuff. Like today I was doing the rear delt pull downs and the T-bar row where I'm doing, it's like lat focus. And so like you have me doing normal range of motion. And then obviously towards the end, like the second set is at least later in this training cycle, it's 60, 70%. So I'm already not pulling all the way down. And then towards the end, you have me going even like descending reps, right? So I'm even going even less. And dude, I feel it's so funny because I'm like, God, people are probably thinking I'm just like sitting over here trying to ego lift and stuff because it requires the shorter the range of motion. It really does, especially in the back exercises. It really does require more weight. Like you have to put more weight on there. Otherwise you're going to be doing, I feel like a shit ton of reps. And so it's just funny I just feel like I'm one of those guys that's just ego lifting now at this point with anything. It's what you're doing. As long as there's a reason behind it, it is what it is.
Yeah. You're in the most effective range of the range of motion, right? So like when you look back at the old school people and we would judge them for not locking out their bench presses. Oh, that's such a bro lift, but that's actually super beneficial. And it's the people not going all the way down to their chests that are really the ones causing themselves harm in their hypertrophy goals.
Do you think with these integrated partials, just want to finish up here with this, the volume and intensity, do you think that you maybe want to stay a little bit further away from failure on these, or does that not matter? And then the volume aspect of it, again, I know that they're going to obviously be playing opposing roles on each other, but I didn't know if in general the volume.
I think of it more on a set for set basis than anything. And so one hard set of integrated partials should be somewhat equivalent to one hard set of full range of motion, or one hard set at 60 to 70% range of motion. It would be interesting to look at time under tension with each of those methods, because it seems to me when I'm recording my sets that the integrated partial sets take 20 to 40% longer than my other sets. And so clearly there's more time under tension there, but how much of that time is like effective tension? Because you are spending a decent amount of time at the short position in those integrated partial sets versus when you're in a 60 to 70% range of motion set. All of that tension, the time that you're spending is effective. Yeah, it's information that's interesting and we could go down so many rabbit holes with it. But at the end of the day, I think set for set is probably the best way of looking at that, and then assessing individual variables of recovery and progress and making adjustments as needed for that individual.
Cool. Yeah. I thought it was an interesting topic. I've just been seeing it pop up a lot more too on social media. So I thought we've been doing it now for a couple months. So just want to hear if you had any extra thoughts on it or anything like that. So cool. Let's go into the next one here. I wanted to talk to you about supersets. I actually just had guys at Data Driven Strength on and we talked about supersets, but I haven't really had too much conversation on the podcast about supersets for muscle growth. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. Do you find them to be useful? And then maybe we can talk about how to implement them and what their uses are and whatnot, and how to actually implement them into your program.
Yeah, totally. I love this conversation. It seems that research is very on board with antagonist supersets. So that would be going from like a bench press to a row type movement, or like a overhead press to a pull down or something along those lines. I think the term superset, people often assume that they're done with no rest between them. And that's how I usually describe it as well. And I use the term alternating sets to describe essentially a superset that has rest in between it. And so I'm not a huge fan of supersetting compound antagonistic muscle group movements where there's no rest between them. So that would be like, say you take your hack squat and your leg curl, and you're just going to superset them back and forth with no rest. I don't really see the point in doing that. I would rather see you rest in between so that you can focus and get more out of each of those movements. But I do love setting up training in a fashion where if the client is able to alternate movements, that they can. And so when you look at your program, it will often go like back, chest, or whatever. And you don't have to obviously do those alternating because you're in a commercial gym and it can be very difficult for you to hold down multiple pieces of equipment at the same time. But if you can, what I really like about that approach is that you could essentially take a minute and a half rest between your chest and your back, and then take another minute and a half coming back to your chest. And when you count those 3 minutes of rest, plus you count the time it took you to do the back movement, you're actually getting like 4 minutes of rest by the time you get back to your chest set. Where the alternative would be that you're just sitting there doing straight sets of chest, and there's no way you're going to rest 4 minutes because you're going to be sitting there like twiddling your thumbs, wondering why you're not doing another set. But I find performance to be just a little bit higher when I'm taking 4 minutes of rest versus 2.5, even 3 minutes of rest. And so I really like the alternating ones for that reason. I don't like the supersetting, like I said, because it causes a lot of kind of central fatigue, that I think cardiovascular fatigue as well. Trying to go from a press to a row or a row to a press, you're just going to be breathing heavy in your second movement. And so that will decrease focus. And then I do really love agonist And I say that knowing that science doesn't like fully support that. There haven't been a ton of studies. I think maybe one on agonist supersets, and I don't think it found them effective. But man, I've been a fan of same muscle group supersets for years. I've been using them since the first 3 years that I trained, 4 years, something like that. And I don't use them on every muscle group, but I do really like them as something where you can go from a short movement to a lengthened movement for a hypertrophy goal, or in the case of a metabolic goal, I could go from lengthened to short. Because generally in a agonist superset, whatever movement is done second is the one that's going to take more of the stimulus. And so in a metabolic cycle, we would want that short movement to be second, whereas in like a general hypertrophy focused cycle, you would want the short movement first and put the lengthened movement second. And so I really enjoy those. I've programmed some of them for you. I think we've gone straight arm pull down to lat pull down before. I think we've done like a dumbbell lateral raise to a cable lateral raise, and we've done a cable fly or pec fly to a push up. So we've done a few different iterations of them, and I don't splatter them all over programming because I do consider myself to be evidence-based, but like it says in my profile on Insta, I'm like 70% evidence and 30% intuition. And I've just really enjoyed these throughout my career. And I've found that clients I've programmed them for across group programs and individual clients have also found the same. And I continue programming them.
So you said on those agonist supersets, so those are going to be the ones where you said you're doing the same muscle group, right?
Yeah.
For each one. The second one's going to get more of the stimulus than the first one?
Correct. Yeah.
What's the rationale, not the rationale, but what's the actual, what's going on there?
Yeah. So I believe that it's just because you are more fatigued when you do that second movement, and thus you have to work harder through those ranges of motion to move the weight.
Got you. And so you're saying from a hypertrophy standpoint, you would want to do the shortened movement first and then follow that up with a lengthened movement, ideally, because again, lengthen probably better for muscle growth. And so you'd want that to be the stimulus that do you think that would alter how much weight you could do if you were to do a straight set of just lengthen and then you would add in the shorten before? Do you think that will alter how much weight you can do? Or is it not necessarily the weight that's important? It's just that the tension stimulus that we're going for there?
Yeah, the muscle only knows tension. But yes, to answer your question, of course, you'll have to use less weight, like obviously. But what you will find, which I think further signifies my point a little bit, is that if you go from lengthened to short, you're going to have to use less weight on the short movement than you would on the lengthened movement if you went short to lengthened. Does that make sense? So your performance would be decreased less by putting the lengthened movement second than it would by putting the lengthened movement first.
Got you. Okay. That makes sense. And with those two, it's basically you're doing the shortened position and then finishing that set and going straight into the lengthen, and then you're resting after that one, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the other rationale there is that when you're doing a short movement, you fail short, but you still have all of this range of motion left that isn't fatigued yet because you failed short. So then you come in and you do the lengthen movement, and now you're fatiguing all of that range of motion that wasn't fatigued from the short movement. Whereas when you do the lengthen movement, you're fatiguing the whole spectrum of the range of motion. So when you go to the short movement, the short position's also been fatigued.
So it sounds in terms of, I think that's how they say it, so opposing muscle groups. With that, you're not a fan of, at least compound-wise, you're not a fan of doing one, going straight into the other, because you just feel like cardiovascularly, you'll probably be just breathing heavy. That's obviously going to affect your training. So with those, you'd like to do what you would call like alternating sets, where it's like you take a little bit of rest in between, but you can potentially shorten that time and go back and forth if you want to on those. What about if it was more isolation? Would you same consideration there on that? Or
yeah, I don't really have a problem if you want to do it on isolation. It's
okay.
like I think it's mostly a time saving mechanism at that point. It's like I have a sequence in my programming often where I'll have a one arm curl and a one arm tricep extension, and I'll literally just roll through those 4 sets where I'll go like right arm curl. So I'll go right arm overhead, right arm curl, left arm overhead, left arm curl. And I'll pretty much roll through those with 15 seconds of rest between each one. And then I don't get cardiovascularly fatigued from that. By the time I finish that circuit of 4 movements, I might rest 30 seconds, a minute. I don't need a lot of rest. And then I can go right back into the next rotation because my right arm tricep hadn't been worked for 4 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a cool way to do that too, there with that. So this kind of leads me to my next question on this. So that all makes sense. What about in terms of programming? Because I've seen it done both ways. I know like old programming I did, it was you would do, say in a day, if it was an upper body day, you would do, okay, it's a chest focused day, push focused day. So you're going to do, for example, you're going to do your first chest exercise, then your second chest exercise, then you would do back and then back. What are your kind of thoughts on that versus the alternating like you talked about? And is one maybe better for hypertrophy?
I really like the alternating, man. I don't see much argument for why it would be better to stack same muscle groups, because whether you're doing intra-workout nutrition or post-workout nutrition or both, like you just have more. I guess it's even better of an argument if you're only doing post-workout nutrition, because imagine if you do all your chest work in the beginning, but you're not actually putting any nutrition in your body till the end of the workout, then you still have to get through all your back work. Well, your chest work's now gone like 45 minutes or more, and you haven't fueled or any of that recovery. But if you're alternating between them, when you finish your workout, you basically finished both movements at the same time, and boom, now you're optimizing recovery for them. But that's just on the nutritional side of the argument. I think just from a performance side, the fact that you can get the workout done faster, but rest more between sets of the same movement, I just see no downside to that at all. And so, yeah, I have a home gym, so I'm able to do that pretty seamlessly as long as I'm smart with the programming and I'm not doing like a cable row and a cable chest press at the same time. It'll be like T-bar row, cable chest press. But I can't remember the last cycle that I did where I would complete all of the same muscle group in a row. It's almost always done in some sort of like rest circuit fashion like that.
So you are doing the alternating thing where you do take maybe a little bit of a shorter rest, but you're alternating or not?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's that idea of chest press, rest 90 seconds, back movement, rest 90 seconds, and then back to chest again.
Because like my understanding, the rationale was like from a muscle building standpoint of doing it both chest movements first and then going to back is, and that second one, it's like you're a little fatigued. So it's like that fatigue can be helpful from a muscle building standpoint, right? Where it's like you more like you're closer to failure from it. So there's that, I feel like, argument with it. But then there's also like you might be doing less because you're fatigued as well.
Yeah. Wouldn't that first argument that you made though fall into the argument of short rest? Because if you just take short rest, then you're going to have more fatigue and you're going to lift less weight. And before you know it, you could just be doing like rest pause sets the entire time and never actually taking full rest.
Yeah. No, 100%, right? And we know that if you don't rest enough in between, then you obviously have to do more volume to make up for it.
So I just look at it as this alternating sequence allows you to get more rest, which just will elicit better performance and whatever. I don't think of it too much as I get a better pump and a burn because I'm doing these sets in succession or whatever.
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? These little kind of nitty gritty details in terms of it. Because again, I can see it both ways. Since you've done the coaching, I've started to, I like it doing alternating. I think it's better. And then like you said, you can potentially, this is something that like I have a lot of clients that do ask about. Again, a lot of my clients are Gen Pop clients, so they need this kind of gym efficiency almost in a way. And so I can definitely see how that can make it more efficient there with doing the alternating if they can get it right. Because like you said, the issue becomes when you're in a commercial gym, it can be tough to get that set up there with that. So
I tend to program for a lot of my commercial clients and the group programs, which a lot of people are working out in commercial gyms. I'll usually alternate a dumbbell movement with a machine or cable movement. Yeah. Because then I feel like they can just bring the dumbbells over to the cable machine. And now we can easily do that kind of alternating sequence without having to make it a huge hassle.
Yeah. No, that's a smart way too. Yeah. Sometimes it can be, it's hard to keep all that together, but it can be useful to let them do that. But man, sometimes it can be tough to figure out how exactly to make all that work. But hey, that's why we get paid the big bucks, right?
What's more optimal, like doing them alternating, but choosing a suboptimal movement, or choosing like the most optimal movement and not have them be alternating? It's just such a rabbit hole you can go down. And I think both have positives and negatives.
With the more I learn about all this stuff, that really is always what you're trying to figure out is like, all right, if I do it that way, what's the pros and cons? I feel like you're always just doing that balancing act with all this stuff. Cool, man. We've been at this for a while now, so I'm going to be respectful for your time and let you go here. Before I let you go, is there anything coming up on your end that you want to lead the audience to or anything like that?
We have at Paragon, we have a new specialty cycle starting. We talked about specialty cycles a couple podcasts ago. People can go check that out. But on October 9th, all of our Paragon physique programs are going to be starting a glutes and delts specialization cycle. And we're actually programming it in a manner so that if you would like to prioritize quads instead of glutes, then we're providing ways that you can implement the glute movement in a quad dominant manner and thus turn it into a quads and shoulders specialization cycle instead of a glutes and shoulders. So it should be pretty fun. It's the first time I'm doing something where you have like that kind of choice or option in there. Yeah. So it's been fun from like a program design standpoint as well. But that drops October 9th. And then the new cycle of Bryan's program is also going to start October 9th after my bike race, whichever one kind of floats your fancy or whatever the word phrasing is there.
So you said it was for more physique. Do you guys still like kind of program in some like cardio and stuff like that in that one? Or is that like less cardio intensive compared to like the one that you train with Bryan?
Yeah. So the way we've been doing cardio now for all of our general physique programs is that we have a cardio add-on program. And so it's not actually programmed directly into the weekly programming. Like the weekly programming is just 4 times a week of weight training. And then you can add a cardio add-on program to your calendar, which includes 2 zone 2 sessions and 1 zone 5 session each week. And you can either do all 3 of those or none of them, or kind of pick and choose whatever fits best into your schedule.
Yeah, man, doing the zone 2 man's been freaking awesome. I already, like I told you, again, it could just be in my head. It could be placebo, but like with hockey, like I do already notice a little bit of a difference. And then like afterwards, I do just feel like I used to just feel super tired. Now I could have maybe just not gone as hard the other day. Obviously that's going to play a role, but I just feel better after my trainings, like after my hockey games. I don't feel like it takes me, I'm just not like, dude, I'm just like dragging ass throughout the day. Yep. But also that episode, the specialization, it was $297. So if anybody wants to check that out, a ton of great information in there. And I like the changing it from the glutes to the quads, because probably I feel like glute and delt's probably a little bit more female focused. Quads and delt's probably a little bit more male focused, but I think it could go either way. So cool, man. Anything else on that end?
Nah, man, we're good. This is fun.
Yep. Cool. We'll appreciate your time. Obviously, we'll get you back on here again soon, and we'll talk to you next time.